Of course, there are plenty of housing concerns in the city, the biggest one being affordability. Mayor Zoran Mamdani first running for office on tackling New York City's housing crisis, especially when it comes to those sky-high rents. One of the biggest advocates for affordable housing in New York City is joining me now, Executive Director for Open New York, Annemarie Gray. So, Annemarie, great to have you here on Picks and Politics for the first time. Good to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
And I want to begin with the big news of this week, right? Governor Kathy Hochul proposing this pied-à-terre tax on homes in the city worth more than $5 million. And it's a means to help shrink the city budget deficit. So for those who were asking, does it affect people who live in New York City? The idea was it's for somebody who lives elsewhere but has that pied-à-terre here in the city. How do you see this as having any impact on housing in general?
I think stepping back, we are clearly seeing every level of government focused on how to address affordability for New Yorkers, and we're finally seeing a real consensus between the governor, the mayor on the root issue, which is that we have a housing shortage and we need to speed up building housing. There's no silver bullet solution, and fairer and more equitable taxes across the board is absolutely part of the equation. But I actually think more than anything, this announcement shows how much the politics of housing have shifted and how much we're seeing an alignment that we haven't seen in decades around the most critical issues that both the city and the state actually have tremendous power to fix. And this is speeding up housing, and how much we're seeing the mayor and the governor align on that. And we're particularly focused right now on seeker reform, which is the top thing in the state budget that is really has a major effect as one of a really important set of tools for us to finally address housing affordability.
Yeah, the tax proposal coming as Mayor Mamdani is pushing for this overall increase in income taxes for the rich. His last resort, if that does not happen, is raising property taxes. Now, he always has said, he said it right to me on this show, that it's a last resort. But some argue that that cost could be passed on to renters, right? So I know you have a position on this. Where do you stand on if that were to happen, on how it kind of gets a trickle-down effect to really affect the affordability crisis? Could it have like a back-end effect?
I really think, look, fairer and more equitable taxes, especially addressing the inequitable property tax system, is a very important part of the solution. But I really do think, no single tax solves a supply crisis. Yeah. And what this deal does confirm is that the politics of housing have shifted. And there's a whole slew of proposals on the table that both the mayor and the governor are finally recognizing we need to tackle, that we have a housing shortage. We have to speed up the construction of housing. And those are the tools that I'm most focused on and most interested in right now.
So I guess, how do you do that, right, Annemarie? Because this is not something that's new. The housing crisis is something that has been talked about for decades. And yet it seems like every time we get a new mayor or a new administration, they're like, we're going to fix it and here's how. But it is quite the timeline to get new housing on board. So how do you see that timeline kind of being expedited?
Yeah. So we've had a housing shortage for decades, but I really do think in the last couple of years, we've seen a monumental political shift, and that everyone is defining the problem in the same way now, right? We need to build more housing, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit ways to speed that up. That takes time, but for example, we've seen the governor and the mayor stand together to put seeker reform as one of the top issues in the state budget. This is one of the biggest supply levers on the table in negotiations right now. Red tape adds up to $82,000 per unit in New York City. Yeah. In construction costs. And so we have to be addressing this. We saw ballot measures that are finally getting used. We're seeing, City of Yes really starting to work. We need so many types of tools, but it's actually the first time in a really long time you're seeing the governor, the mayor, and elected officials across the board agree on what the types of solutions need to be and start to unite around them in a way we really haven't seen before.
Certainly a multi-layered approach, right? There are apartments, by the way, that just kind of are there but are still remaining vacant and empty, which is another part of the problem. But I want to get to the Rent Guidelines Board voting in a couple months. They'll be voting on these rent increases. The mayor wants a rent freeze. He campaigned on freeze the rent. What do you see happening?
So the rent freeze gets the headlines, but again, the more interesting story here to me is what the mayor is doing on the cost of building housing. That's really.
Let me just on the. He campaigned on it, which is why I think it gets the headline, right? It was something that was the monumental base of his campaign, which is why I'm just, I'll get to the building for a second, but what is your take on the rent freeze? Do you want one?
We are, honestly, I'm really focused on what the longer term solutions here are. Of course, this is a top part of his platform, but I think we've actually really seen an evolution of how we need to do a lot of different things. And we're really focused on all of the ways that we speed up the cost of housing, which is what is going to really have an impact on giving tenants more options and more leverage and reducing costs in the long term. And that's what we're focused on as an organization.
Yeah, I gotcha. Mayor Mamdani also just passed his first 100 days in office last week, and he pushed hard and put forward plans for what exactly you're talking about, affordable housing, the building of it. But he also stepped back on some things that he campaigned on, like the city FHEP's program, right? The vouchers. So what are you rating him on tackling the city's housing crisis and the work that's been done? It is early on. It's still the honeymoon phase, but how are you looking at the 100 days?
I feel really positive in the way that he is signaling that you really clearly understand our housing crisis is a housing shortage. We need an all of the above solution.
Yep.
There is a whole set of proposals that a progressive administration can and need to embrace. And I'm watching really closely for what is in the full housing plan and what they start to tackle after 100 days that is really going to, what they're going to spend the next 3.5 years on. But I do think a lot of the signaling that we're getting is that he's really seeing the root of the issue. And he's putting some really smart people in place to develop what that plan is. And we're watching it really closely.
Annemarie Gray, I appreciate you coming on for your first appearance here on Picks and Politics. We'll have more conversations along the way. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
All right.